In this video, we're going to see how we can use foreign keys to capture relationships between things in our database. Let's assume that we're using a database with three tables. The student table that we talked about earlier, in which ID is the primary key, and there are also attributes for the student's name, address, and email. Another table for faculty information. Here again, ID is the primary key, and we also have columns for the faculty member's name, office, and phone number. And then finally a table for departments. Here the name is determined to be unique, and so it can serve as the primary key. We also have the address of the department office and the phone number of the department office. Each of these tables is capturing information about a type of entity. Now we said we can also use tables to capture relationships between two or more entities. So for example, let's say we want to capture relationships between students and their advisors. So we have the student entities in one table, we have the faculty members in another table. One way that we could capture that relationship, or that type of relationship, is by adding an attribute to the student table called advisor. So for example, if Jill Jones is being advised by Ted Codd, we take the ID number of Ted Codd and we store it in the advisor column for Jill Jones. And that tells us that her advisor is Ted Codd. Similarly, if Alan Turing is being advised by Edgar Dijkstra, we take his ID, Edgar Dijkstra's, and we store it in the advisor column for Alan Turing. And so that's an example of capturing a relationship between two types of entities. And this type of attribute that captures a relationship is known as a foreign key. More precisely, a foreign key is an attribute that takes on values from the primary key column of another relation. So in this case, advisor is a foreign key that takes on values from the primary key of the faculty table. And you can think of the foreign key as referring to that separate primary key column. Now the name of the foreign key doesn't need to match the name of the corresponding primary key. So here I'm calling the foreign key advisor, whereas the primary key is called ID. But what does need to match is every value that I put in the foreign key has to already exist in the corresponding primary key. So in this case, it's okay to have 11111 in advisor because that value is already in the corresponding primary key. Now another example of a type of relationship is the relationship between students and the departments in which they are majoring. If we assume that a student has at most one major, then we can do something similar to what we did for advisor. We can add an attribute, a foreign key attribute, to the student table, and I'm calling it major, and it can take on values from the primary key column of department. So for example, if Jill Jones is majoring in computer science, we can take the primary key value of the department and store it up here in her foreign key cell for major. Alan Turing, majoring in mathematics, we do the same thing. So this works just fine, provided that a student can have at most one major. If a student can have more than one major, then we can't do it that way. So for example, we're not allowed to do something like computer science, English for Jill Jones if she's majoring in both of those subjects. And the reason goes back to what we said, which is that we're not allowed to have multi-valued attributes in the relational model. And that restriction prevents us from having something like this. So what do we do instead? We're actually going to remove that foreign key from student. So student goes back to being the way it was before. And instead, we're going to create a separate table whose sole purpose is to capture these relationships. I'm calling this new relation majors in, and it actually has two foreign keys. One that connects it to the student table, so it takes on values from the primary key of student, and another one that connects it to the department table and takes on values from the primary key of that table. So for example, if I put this row into majors in, what I'm saying is that Jill Jones is majoring in computer science. If she's also majoring in English, we can just put her in here a second time. So her student ID appears a second time, but this time it's in conjunction with English. And this way she can have as many majors as we want by just adding additional rows to this special relationship table, majors in. And if a student only has one major, they'll have one row in that table. If they have 3 majors, they'll have 3 rows in that table. And this gets around the problem of not being able to have multi-valued attributes.